Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of r/slash entitled parents. In today's episode, my mom stole my inheritance and kicked me out of the family when I asked her to pay it back. When evil Mama Bear tried to restart the HOA. Entitled mother accused GF of lying about a job interview, saying it was just so that she could stay longer. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe so you will never miss a video. So let's get started. My mom stole my inheritance and kicked me out of the family when I asked her to pay it back. My mother has me all kinds of F***kid up, and I'm not sure if I should just walk away. Backstory: my 27F mom, 53F, has had a really hard life. She was in a car accident at age 5 and watched her own mother die. She didn't have an active father, and no one on her mom's side wanted to take her in, so she went into foster care for a few years. Not good experience from what she told me. At age 8 she was adopted into a loving, wealthy family of 2 college professors, along with an adopted brother. She had a hard time adjusting, made a lot of bad decisions, and basically ran away in her late teens. This whole time her adopted parents were doing everything they could to reach out to their daughter and help her get on her feet, but mostly, their efforts were wasted. She has a child at 18, then again a few years later. She lost them to foster care, and then had me with a different man. Eventually, she gets her 2 first kids back, my older half-brothers, has me, marries twice again, and has 2 more kids, my 2 younger brothers. In total, she has 5 children, 4 boys with me, the middle girl. We grow up very poor, with our mother always gone or bringing back strangers to party, leaving me to raise the youngest 2. We would visit our grandparents, mom's adopted parents, for holidays and special occasions, but with my mother's strained relationship with them, we weren't able to visit as much as we kids would like. My childhood was sh*tty to say the least. That being said, I loved my grandparents, especially my GPA, dearly, and they loved us kids back, and as much as they struggled with my mom, they were nothing but loving towards her from what I understand. The thing about my grandparents is that education was very important to them. I remember the encouragement for college started very early on from them, and they made it very clear that I was expected to go to college. When I was allowed to visit them, they would take me to bookstores and let me loose. They'd say, "Okay, pick one," and I would come back with 3 or 4 unable to decide. They'd laugh and get me all the books, which I could not believe. I took pride in knowing my grandparents thought so highly of my future, and was determined to keep making them proud. Fast forward to 2005, I'm in 5th grade, and my grandma passed away from long-term alcohol abuse. My mom has a wake-up call and gets sober, but is still absent from AA meetings in general disinterest. Then in 7th grade, my grandpa passed as well from the same illness. This crushed me. I wasn't able to articulate any of it at the time, but that's when the big-time depression rolled in. From there on, school was very difficult for me, as well as my home life. I ended up falling pretty deep into my sorrow and stopped going to school around my junior year of high school. After a breakthrough, I decided that I had to get the hell away from that house and ultimately moved out at age 17 to a bigger city about 45 minutes away. I barely finished high school with a 1.75 GPA, and somehow, 2 teachers from the new school convinced me to sign up for the community college. They helped me fill out my FAFSA and everything. Side note, when I received my mom's financial info for that year for the FAFSA, I saw she claimed to make around $10,000 a year. That's how poor we were. After my first semester in college, I was hooked. Science was actually pretty cool. I realized I loved to learn and kept pushing through. I worked full-time, busted my ass, and after 4 years I finally achieved an associate degree, but that wasn't enough for me. I was able to transfer over to a university that I would have never been able to attend right out of HS due to grades and whatnot, and finish my BS in my favorite field of science. In total, it took me 6 years to get my BS degree, but I worked so freaking hard and I was so proud of what I was able to accomplish. Keep in mind, during my whole college career, my mother was characteristically absent and dismissive of what I was doing. When I was in my early 20s, still at community college, she packed up her and my baby brothers and moved 5 hours up north. I didn't have a car and couldn't come see them hardly at all. I was upset by this, of course, but that didn't matter to her. She eventually moved back a couple years later. Anyway, I graduate college with $40,000 college debt. Not so bad compared to most, I always thought. I knew that I would have to work hard and accrue debt to get where I wanted in life, so this was a necessary burden, and I've accepted that. However, things have turned in recent events in my effort to get closer to my late grandparents. I reached out to their close personal friends, let's call them the Johnsons, to get a better idea of what my grandparents were like. They were so close that the Johnsons were actually the arbiter of my GPA's will. In conversation, it came out that when my parents passed away, they left a $150,000 inheritance for the grandchildren's education. However, 3 years later, around 2010, my mother came to the Johnsons and confessed to them that she blew all the education money. On what, I have no freaking idea, but I do remember her buying a 2-door sports car, our only car for a 6-person family, after Grandpa died, so I'm sure the rest of her purchases were great investments/s. This was really upsetting to me for many reasons. I was the only grandchild that actually went to college, and that money could have easily covered my expenses. If I had that money, I wouldn't have had to spend every moment for 6 years busting my ass. I could have afforded to only have one job instead of 3. I could have spent that time studying and getting better grades or done an internship which literally makes or breaks your career in my field. I wasn't able to do any of that and haven't been able to get a related job, not the worst thing but unfortunate. I have a fine job in tech that I wouldn't have been able to get without my degree. I'm plenty happy with my decision. My relationship with her was already strained, but this really crossed a line for me. I emailed her telling her I knew what she did, and she needed to pay me back. That's probably not going to happen. She owns a small business in social media, and it doesn't do that great. I kind of want to just cut ties forever, but I'm so angry I also want her to pay back the money she stole. I am so out of my depth, IDK what to do. When evil Mama Bear tried to restart the HOA. Now the neighborhood my mother's house is in had an HOA that was disbanded in the early 90s for the pretty stereotypical reasons. Corrupt leaders, misappropriation of funds, etc. I really don't have many details on it since I was very little when it went down. But my mother had apparently been openly aiming for a seat on the HOA council for years. So she was really sore when the HOA was gone because she could no longer run for a position. Fast forward to 1999. Evil Mama Bear had been trying to quote the old HOA covenants to the neighborhood for years and insisted that the rules and regulations set forth when the HOA was active should still be abided by. Literally no one wanted to listen to her. So my mother started putting flyers around the neighborhood that detailed she was restarting the HOA without their approval and would be its first new president. The neighbors ended up in an uproar over this and showed up to her public meeting. And there she was, verbally ripped to shreds, as nearly every single homeowner in the neighborhood not only denied their support of another HOA, but also made it clear to her what she was trying to do was not legal. My mother was incensed by this. And no surprise, she didn't even have my father's support. Which was something she'd initially been counting on. But he refused from the onset of her scheme. And when the neighborhood all refused to recreate the HOA, evil Mama Bear went off on my dad for not being supportive of her. After she gaslighted herself into nearly being out of breath, my dad told her she was just looking for a way to lord over the neighborhood, and he'd never support that. She tried to argue with him some more. But he just ended the conversation and walked away. Somehow that still didn't stop my mother though. She went and contacted a sleazy lawyer about trying to get the HOA running again without the support of the residents. Her hope was that there was some sort of law that could reactivate the HOA on different grounds. The lawyer went through all of the old HOA documents and state laws over a couple of days and told my mother there was nothing that could be done as it was not enforceable, and that without the consent and signed support of enough people in the neighborhood there was no way to legally restart the HOA. Then proceeded to bill evil Mama Bear for the time he spent looking through all of that. Since my mother hired the sleazy lawyer herself under the table, she had to pay him. But she hated paying anyone for anything because she was so cheap. Now an important fact of note was that my dad hadn't trusted evil Mama Bear with his money for years and no longer kept joint bank accounts with her. And she had no way to access his money. So she filed for a new credit card using his name, and then used said credit card to pay the lawyer instead. My dad noticed a new credit card statement in his name pretty fast, and nearly filed for fraud when my mother came clean out of fear. He demanded she pay off the credit card, and then have said card deactivated. My mother didn't want to, but he threatened to call the fraud department of his bank on her. I still remember hearing the argument where she tried to claim that he couldn't do that because they were married, and everything that was his was also hers. And that meant that she could do what she did, and he'd still have to pay. Dad called *T on that and said he'd contest the charges and get the card removed from his name, which would have left my mother in serious legal trouble for fraud and debt collection. And so evil Mama Bear begrudgingly paid off the money owed. And my dad cut the card to little pieces with scissors. My mother had the money to pay the lawyer all along. She just preferred to keep her cash and put any expenses she could on my father. But he always stopped her, and she'd try to pull the shared assets logic because they were married. Though that ended when they divorced. Evil Mama Bear still spent the next few years trying to quote the HOA covenants to neighbors. But she was always dismissed or laughed at every single time she tried. A few people started referring to her as President Wannabe. To this day no HOA has formed in the neighborhood again. And even if one did, they'd never vote in evil Mama Bear. I can only imagine what would happen if she tried to pull this crap in Texas after she moves there. Entitled mother accused GF of lying about a job interview, saying it was just so that she could stay longer. Hi, this is my first time posting on this subreddit, so please excuse any mistakes I make. I'm writing this story on behalf of my girlfriend, 20. She's feeling unsure about the whole situation and feels the need for some outside perspective. The story takes place about 2 weeks ago. So for quick background, my girlfriend and I, 21, live 45 minutes away from each other. Doesn't sound like much, but it's hard due to gas prices and me losing my job recently. We've been together for over 2 years now, and are looking to move in with each other as soon as we are stable financially. Recently, while she was returning home from visiting me, they were barely out my driveway, she received a phone call about a job interview the following day, and from here on things didn't sit well with her family. On the day of the call early in the afternoon, her sister and her sister's boyfriend, from here on known as Entitled Sister ES and Cool Dude CD, notified us they were coming to pick her up. It was on short notice, and we were fairly upset about it, but decided not to argue, as to not cause trouble due to her relationship with her parents being fairly rocky the last few years. GF got emotional because she didn't want to leave so soon, and this ended up with her sister making snide remarks and insulting her for crying for no reason. This in turn also aided in the fight to come with her parents. Soon after they had left my house, she received a call to notify her of a job interview at a local winery and farm in my town. She immediately called her parents and talked to them about what happened, and they agreed to let her stay longer. While all this was happening, ES also called their EM to tell her that she thinks the whole thing is being made up by GF and me as a way to get her to stay longer. When they dropped her off at my place again, her mother immediately demanded proof of the phone call and the interview, as well as beginning to accuse us of lying to them. We sent them the proof, contacts and call logs as well as the job application, though after it seemed they believed us even less, stating that she was conniving and attempting to pull a fast one on them, this all under the full knowledge that she had been planning to move to the town where I live for some time now. She had been open and honest with them from the very beginning. After the actual interview, things got even more complicated. EM refused to believe that the interview had actually taken place and wanted to come get her, but her father, hereforth known as ED Entitled Dad, convinced EM to let her wait for the second call, seeing as she was told she would be put through to the second interview. During this call with EM and ED, GF wasn't given much chance to speak, and when did her words would be twisted and taken out of context by EM as to give an excuse to yell at her and berate her. This is a very common thing with EM, especially towards GF, and tends to work on ED and turn him against GF as well. A few days went by and no second call came. We ended up following up ourselves, and were promised to call the next day. A few more days go by without call, and her parents without notice come to pick her up. Demoralizing as this was, we didn't argue, as they were already breathing down her neck and spitting insults all the way. Her mother berated her, and called her a lying, conniving, horrible person, and accused her of not loving her anymore and all but kicked her out, telling her she should just leave. This continued for about a day or two before the company finally called and arranged for the second interview the following day. ED lightened up a bit and allowed her to go as long as she returned home immediately after. The interview went well, and we are now waiting to hear from them again. EM and ES are now treating her like a stranger and talking crap about her behind her back, always within earshot of her. There was also a blown-out argument where both ED and EM berated her and accused her of all manner of things, such as lying to them to get what she wants, and a multitude of snide remarks towards my and GF's relationship, and EM then proceeding to use grief as a justification for treating her this way. She had recently lost people very close to her, but this kind of behavior has been a common thing for many years before that. They also felt the need to tell GF that the grief she feels for her friend, who died recently as well, can never compare to what EM feels for her own friends that had died. I would go deeper into it, but this post is already quite long, and there is a full hour of argument to type out. She recorded the whole thing. She sent this to our close friends to find out if she's in the wrong, and they all agree with us. Thanks for reading, and would love to get some feedback from you guys.